Nobody 2 is a 2025 American film directed by Timo Tjahjanto and stars Bob Odenkirk, Connie Nielsen, RZA, Christopher Lloyd, John Ortiz, Colin Hanks, and Sharon Stone. The plot follows an assassin returning to that line of work after trying his hand as a company man, I guess you could say, but it is taking a toll on his relationship with his family, and he needs to plan a good vacation or something before everything just falls apart. So I was a bit late to Nobody from 2021. I watched it maybe a year ago, maybe two at the most. I'm a huge Bob Odenkirk fan, but I'm just not really into action movies much these days. But Nobody was much more to me than just an action movie. You know, it did have all the violence that I do like, along with the great fight choreography. But it also had a really heartwarming story that really resonated with me. Of course, you had the story of Hutch, played by Bob Odenkirk, whose home was robbed, leading him to feel ashamed for not being able to protect his family. And it's just such a great story with a great emotional and relatable performance from Odenkirk. But this time around, you have Hutch returning to assassin work, after the events of the first film. And this was kind of predictable, I guess, but also pretty fun. And you get some wild action scenes almost right from the start. Very cool way to start, I think. Very almost like Deadpool 2. And you get a little bit of the emotion, that I was hoping for this time, in the form of Hutch's job causing tension in the Mansell family. His work just takes up way too much of his time, and he's also struggling with the fact that he's, realizing that he does sometimes enjoy hurting people. And I don't think anyone would be able to balance a family life with a job like this without some sort of struggle. And that's kind of where my main complaints come, with this film. I wanted more of that, and it's just kind of glossed over in favor of, being more of a straight-ahead action film. You get a little bit of it with Hutch, not wanting his marriage to end, of course. But that aspect was kind of disappointing to me compared to the first film. And I get it. It was a hard story to compete with. You weren't ever going to be able to recreate, the first film story. But I think the build-up here could have been maybe a little bit more interesting. So Hutch's plan to, take his family on a much-needed vacation to the one place that his dad took him to on vacation as a child. And on paper, that's really not a bad way to continue Hutch's story, I don't think. And I think I need to come to terms with the fact that the premise to Nobody was just so good that it was always going to be hard to follow up. But the first thing I noticed while watching it, this in the theater, was that it did have a slightly overall different feel and vibe, just a little bit. And as much as I'm actually not trying to constantly compare this to the first film, it's a sequel after all, so bear with me. There were some personnel changes, though. Same cast as far as the Mansell family, which is important to me. And that includes Christopher Lloyd as Hutch's former assassin dad, and RZA as Harry, his brother. But we had a different director this time with Timo Tjahjanto, who has a lot of experience in lower to mid-budget horror and a fair amount of action films, too. Nothing that I was at all familiar with. And also joining original writer Derek Kolstad was Aaron Rabin, so two writers this time. And we also had a change in cinematographer in Colin Green. This is all pretty common in film, but it's a risky move, I think, because it usually will bring a new feel, overall, that doesn't always work for fans. And I did kind of feel that here. It just felt slightly different. Not a huge deal, though. So anyways, the Mansell family goes on their vacation where Hutch's temper kind of gets him into a tense situation between small-town police and a ruthless crime boss. And as much as I maybe am sounding fairly negative so far, I did enjoy this movie. Just to set it straight right now, it's a fun 80s, 90s action throwback, with good comedic elements, simple storyline, violent action scenes with, that Bob Odenkirk can actually sell surprisingly well. And sure, it doesn't have quite the emotional impact of the first film, but it is a sequel. It was never going to be the same. Not all chapters of a book are equally as good. And a character like Hutch, in my opinion, is just too good not to use. The frame of the plot, though, if you strip it down, is actually really similar to Nobody, the first film. Instead of it being the Russian mob this time around, it's a different crime syndicate. Most of the side characters are actually fairly interesting, even more over the top this time, especially with the villains, led by the ruthless and sadistic Lendina, played hilariously, I should say, by Sharon Stone. Also, Colin Hanks plays a corrupt cop, and he was fun to watch. I've always been a big fan of his dad, and I think Colin's good too in his own right. Veteran actor John Ortiz, plays the town sheriff, which is a role that he's pretty used to playing. He's in some of the action scenes, and he's pretty stiff compared to Bob Odenkirk, but he's always been a good actor. Seeing Christopher Lloyd in RZA return was really cool too, and I particularly loved how RZA's long love of martial arts were utilized here. You'll know what I mean when you see it, and I'm sure he had a blast with it, I would imagine. I can't remember if any of that was in the first film, but I don't think so. So this is definitely action movie comfort food, I think, in the way that the new Naked Gun was for comedy. So I'm giving Nobody 2 a 7 out of 10. It's a lot of fun, even if I felt slightly let down, after kind of being taken off guard a little bit by the first movie, and how much I enjoyed it. I do also hope that we get a third film because, we need as much Hutch and as much Bob Odenkirk as we can get. Cheers, guys, and I'll see you at the multiplex.